Why don't you just invite everyone in AP?
All right, everyone mute your mics except Nat.
No, you don't have to. Please don't. Well, you don't have to because I don't want to feel like
Andrew,
I'm
you're
just
not
I
talking
have
at
to
the
ask, I'm
computer.
gonna have to ask questions.
Yeah, if you
so.
ask questions, I'd love that because I don't really want to be talking to a computer the whole time. It's not the best thing. It's much better to actually lecture. So Unit 4, it's just Unit 4. We're not doing 5. Um, Unit 4 is basically like the foundations of the democracy that we know it today. So it is sort of Jefferson's whole Democratic Republican scheme, and then we go all the way down to John Tyler, William Henry Harrison, if you know that. I mean, you probably should know William Henry Harrison just because of the fact that he died in office after a month. His inauguration speech was so long that he got pneumonia and he died. It started raining during his speech and he refused to put a coat on, so he died.
Huh.
It's a really sort of stubborn thing that actually kind of defines the American culture, but it's irrelevant right now. So the course or the unit starts off with the Revolution of 1800. It's called the Revolution of 1800 because it's sort of a bloodless revolution. We have our first example of a peaceful transfer of power between parties. So we go from the Federalist Party to the Democratic Republican or the Jeffersonian Party, as they'll be called. So the election kind of goes. The Democratic Republicans are Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. They tie with each other, and Hamilton, who is a very strong Federalist and he absolutely hates Jefferson, picks the lesser evil and sides with Jefferson. So he bites the bullet and he campaigns with Jefferson to hand him the victory. Hamilton hated Aaron Burr a lot more than he disliked Thomas Jefferson. I think his exact quote is that Aaron Burr is a violent, evil man. He's not wrong. Aaron Burr shoots and kills Hamilton in a duel. The way it ends out is Hamilton and Burr duel, which was legal back then. Hamilton shoots his bullet up into the air, and Burr shoots him right in the gut. So Hamilton will die after that duel. We also get the 12th Amendment here. So this amendment establishes political elections as we know it. So before the 12th Amendment, how the president ticket would look like is the electoral college winner would be the president, and then whoever got second place would become the vice president. So after the 12th Amendment, we get a vice president on the same party and the same ticket as the president. So this is where we get that first sort of example of a party ticket with a president and a vice president. So during Jefferson's presidency, we get what's called the Jeffersonian Republic. So before Adams leaves office, he does his midnight appointments. These appointments are basically a lot of judges, a lot of cabinet positions, and a lot of sort of state officials and judges especially that Adams appoints as he's literally leaving office. So Jefferson says,
Wait. Is that because he wants to keep the Federalists?
Yeah, he wants to keep the power.
All right.
So Jefferson obviously is not happy about this, and he says to the Supreme Court, he actually fires someone, and then the person he fires, Marbury, sues him and says, "You cannot fire me. That's my position. It's what I was given. I have a right to my job." So this case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, where John Marshall, who is a very, very influential figure, by the way, and you should know him by name, John Marshall declares that the appointment is invalid, and this is where we first sort of get the course power of judicial review. John Marshall is a very, very key figure for the Supreme Court. He made the Supreme Court what it is today. So before John Marshall, the court is kind of like this, like body. It's not the highest court. Well, it is the highest court in the land, but it certainly didn't have the power that it does today. So
Wait,
it was, yeah.
Sorry, Marbury was the one that what's it called? was like on trial, and they ended up choosing that it was unjust for Marbury to leave his position, correct?
Yeah. So the Secretary of State, or Madison, James Madison, who it is, he says, I am not going to certify the judge, because so he was appointed, and then you have to go through a certification process that takes a lot longer than the actual appointment. So Jefferson's Secretary of State, James Madison, said, I am not certifying this guy because it is unjust, it is whatever. And John Marshall in the Supreme Court said, you have no choice, it's the law. And so this is where we first get this precedent of judicial review.
Wait, you said Marshall created what the judicial system is today?
Yeah,
Or what?
so he created what the Supreme Court, the power the Supreme Court has today. So this case especially, John Marshall kind of sits on a fence here. He sits on a fence. He makes the court a strong sort of federal power. And then he also kind of placates Jefferson. So he plays the fence very well. He hands Jefferson the victory, but he claims a major role for the Supreme Court on the state side. So judicial review, it's something you should know. It's basically that the court has the right to review actual constitutional law, so they can say if something is constitutional or not. So there's only like 3 cases of the Supreme Court you really should know by name. One of them is Marbury versus Madison. The other is Plessy versus Ferguson, which is separate but equal, that kind of thing. And then Brown v. Ed. So that is the desegregation of schools. But that is obviously way further down than where we are right now. So another landmark thing of Jefferson presidency is the Louisiana Purchase. So if you can see my little map down here, the Louisiana Purchase is that large sort of territory from Nebraska, Montana, North Dakota, all the way down to Louisiana. So Jefferson he sits on a fence too. So Jefferson is a strict constitutionalist. So his sort of position is, I am not going to do anything the Constitution says I can't do. And so purchasing land from other countries is sort of a gray area. It's never explicitly mentioned in the actual Constitution, or it's never mentioned in actual state or federal law. So Jefferson uses, I don't know if you remember from the last unit, but the executive privilege of the president to negotiate treaties. He says, it's my right as a president to negotiate treaties, so that means that I can buy and sell land to foreign countries. And that is kind of how he settles that dilemma. The Louisiana Purchase was only bought for, I think, $15 million. So Napoleon kind of got short-ended on that one. Napoleon was obviously in really turmoil. I mean, this was sort of the time where he was going downhill, losing his war in Russia and etc., and Italy especially. So he sells it, gets rid of the land, and this is kind of the end of the French colonial power that once was. So Lewis and Clark, I'm sure you all are familiar with. Lewis and Clark basically just explore these new lands, and they discover a lot of new species, and they kind of just trek the land for natural resources and sort of the landscapes of it. They're not really that relevant. You should just know who they are. You don't need to necessarily know like what they specifically discovered or what they specifically did. So Jefferson's second term, he does get reelected. His second term is much, much, much worse than his first. He will set the sort of road to the War of 1812 that will happen during James Madison's presidency. So he first does this by the Embargo Act of 1807. So on the basis of increasing tensions with Europe, Jefferson says that I am closing trade off to the entire world besides America, basically, besides like Mexico and sort of that region. I think Spain is actually the only one he allows to trade with. This obviously has terrible, terrible economic results. It's almost a total ceasing of imports and exports business that the Americans so heavily relied on. But the only really benefit of this is that it makes the American manufacturers kind of kick it into the high gear and really start producing their own goods. So the response to this is so terrible that Jefferson has to enact another law, the Non-Intercourse Act of 1809. This reopens trade with the rest of the world, barring Britain and France still. So this is kind of the time where the Americans did not like the French because of the XYZ affair, as we talked about last time, and the British because they were their once colonial overlords. So when we get to James Madison's presidency, James Madison is relevant for his Macron's Bill number 2. This reopens trade with Britain and France. This is pretty popular for him. They do like that they can now sell their goods again like they once had. James Madison also will set the stage for the War of 1812 as well. So there was a sort of political party forming in Congress. They were called the War Hawks. They wanted war. This was Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. They wanted war with Great Britain and Spain, especially because they wanted to increase territory. They wanted to take the Western lands. So this is sort of our precursor to what will be Manifest Destiny, if anyone's familiar.
So the Warhawks wanted war against who?
Britain and Spain.
For land?
Yeah, they wanted the land. So, where was I? So the War of 1812, it's a war fought between the Americans and the British. The kickoff of this war is the impressment of U.S. sailors. So impressing sailors is not complimenting them. It's not saying you sail so nicely. It's basically imprisoning them and beating them up. So the Americans were the British and the French didn't really like American sailors. So when they found their trade boats, sometimes they would seize them, jail up their sailors, and take the goods that they had on with them. Obviously, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson were not fans of this, and that's why they responded with their certain acts and embargoes and such things. Other major thing of the War of 1812, it is the burning of the White House. So the White House that is today was not the White House that used to exist. The White House is burned down in 1812. It's only, I think, the only West Wing section of the White House. A big hero of this day is Abigail Adams. She goes pretty unmentioned in a lot of history books. She saves a lot of the art. She saves a lot of the documents that are in the White House. James Madison isn't in the White House at this time. I think he's on vacation or negotiating a treaty somewhere. Abigail Adams saves a lot of the artwork. She saves a lot of the documents in the White House, and she actually preserves a lot of our history. So the Hartford Convention is another landmark in James Madison presidency. Federalists who are sort of slipping their power, they're losing their power. In order to retain their power, they start to kind of put out laws that don't get passed, but laws they want passed. That in order to enact a law of trade, you need a 2/3 majority in Congress, and that the president cannot declare war without 2/3 majority of Congress's approval. That's not still true today. Congress has to approve, and Congress declares wars. So presidents don't declare the wars. It's actually Congress. So that's a little something you might wanna mentally take down before you say that the president declared a war in a DBQ or such things like that. So as I mentioned before, American manufacturing kind of kicks into the high gear. So obviously they can't trade with the British or the French because they're at war with the Brits, and the French are also impressing their sailors. So American manufacturing kicks into the high gear. What becomes of American manufacturing is the national road. So the national road is sort of like an early highway system connecting major trade cities. So Eisenhower, way down the road after World War II, will create the interstate highway system, but the first national road was by James Madison. I think the first one connects Philadelphia and New York. Any questions? Anything like that before I move on?
Nope.
Oh, good. All right. So we're on our next president. It is Monroe. So Monroe was president during what we call the era of good feelings. This is a period of unity. So the time of Monroe's presidency was the 1810s. I think it's 1888, maybe 1818, 1819. It's a period of like unity. They're not really united. I mean, obviously you can see from the image, they're not united because we have sort of a split in the country that will arise from the Missouri Compromise. You guys can see that, right? My participant
Yeah.
was blocking it. Okay, good. So it's not really the most period of unity. It's just sort of like the domestic peace that we had. There weren't any there was sectional strife really wasn't that big of an issue yet. So a good thing to sort of see is the increasing divide among the North and the South. So a LEQ question, essay question they like to ask a lot is to analyze the change of relations between the North and the South from 1770 to 1890, or the Civil War. They'll ask something like that. So those sort of incremental little things that end up completely dividing the North and the South don't just happen overnight. They happen slowly, and they happen economically mainly. So economic and social divisions will cause the sort of split between the North and the South. So the other Supreme Court case you kind of should know is McCulloch versus Maryland. So this establishes, also John Marshall, this establishes that national law supersedes state law. So national law is above state law. So something today is like Roe versus Wade. Like, not to get political, I'm not going to get political, just purely law. Roe versus Wade is federal law. So no state can completely ban abortion because it is federal law. It is ruled by the Supreme Court that such is the law. So no state may sort of like get rid of this.
I just want to go back to we were talking about like the split between the North and the South. So the only difference is the economic and social patterns. It's not like
well, I mean, there are obvious if it boils down to economic and social issues, there obviously are other sort of things you can kind of pull on. But really, if it's on an essay and you're asked to describe the changes, I would pull on like economic issues, social issues, and then you might want to bring up the issue of slavery because that can honestly function on its own.
Okay.
So, as I was saying, right, national law trumps the state law. This will also bring up nullification. So we'll get to nullification also, but as we talked about last unit, nullification is basically the state's right to disobey federal law. So obviously, if we're saying that federal law trumps state law, but I'm also saying that states have the right to nullify any law they seem unconstitutional, we're obviously going to get some tension between there. And that's what starts to come up to end the era of good feelings. So what also results during Monroe's presidency is the Panic of 1819. This is the end of the era of good feelings, basically. It throws the American economy into complete turmoil. It's basically the National Bank kind of recalls the loans during this economic crisis, and people can't pay them. They cannot pay the loans they took out from the government. So obviously the government loses its money, and the economic strife becomes a lot greater. So this is sort of the first example of economic instability that the Americans will go through. The economic principle for this is they might mention it by name. It's called a boom and bust cycle. So the economy, as it's in the name, will boom, it'll go up, it'll bull market for anyone who's into stocks or anything like that. The economy will boom, and then it will bust. So it will bear down to sort of a bad market. That's why we kind of get like a cycle of panics. So like if I say I could give you 10 panics. So there's the panic of 1819, the panic of 1820, then there's the panic of 1824. So the panics are basically economic depressions, but they just don't call them that for some reason. I don't really know, but the economy of the Americas really does have a cyclical nature, even today with the 2008 banking crisis, and then the 2020 sort of pandemic and the bust of the American economy. So John Quincy Adams is not the president yet. He is Monroe's Secretary of State. He is highly regarded as a genius of foreign policy and negotiations. He negotiates the borders, a lot of America's borders, and he pretty well defines them. And he also posits the Monroe Doctrine. So the Monroe Doctrine is one of the many, many doctrines that will come up in this whole course. So the Monroe Doctrine states that you European people stay over there and we won't interfere with you, and you don't come over here to the Americas and you stay out of our stuff as well. So this is the first sort of like ownership of the continent and the whole hemisphere really that America will go through. So America is basically saying like, you do not come to North and South America and we'll stay out of your affairs. But if you come here, we're going to have to get a little bit involved. So this is going to subsequently sort of kick out the Mexicans and sort of lead to more of a Canadian autonomy that will form. Another key thing is the Missouri Compromise. I'm sure some of you know. Does anyone know what the Missouri Compromise is?
Heard of it, but don't know it.
Heard of it, yeah.
Heard of it? Yeah. So it's the it's sort of this green line, if you can see it kind of going across America. It states that if a state is below the green line, it will be a slave state, and if it's above the green line, they will be a free state. So, not to spoil it, but this doesn't obviously work out. The Southerners say, wait, we don't have as many states as you're going to have. And the North kind of says, oh, kind of tricked you. And the southern states don't like this, and then we'll get to popular sovereignty and the bleeding Kansas of the 1830s and 40s that will eventually come to sow the Civil War.
Wait, so this is like the start of when the South wanted to separate and form,
This
like
is sort of like, yeah. So this is like an event you can really pull on to be an example of sort of like not the South breaking off, but the South sort of forming their own identity. So a big thing that's going to happen is like Moscow, you were talking about like the social things, like the South start to see themselves as Southerners more than they see themselves as Americans. So this sort of trend will start to pick up, especially in the 1830s and the 1840s, and it starts really here. So the Missouri Compromise, I mean, literally it divides America in two, you know? So this is where we start to see the Southern pride and that kind of thing start to form itself. So the election of 1824, this is also a pretty major election because it ends the caucus system. So basically for the caucus system, presidents would have control over their like sort of whole political party and their political spectra and that sort of thing. But the actual caucuses do end here. So the caucus of the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans and such things like that will start to sort of decline. So this is where we see the emergence of other parties such as the Whig Party and the more like Democratic parties of Andrew Jackson. Don't get the Jackson Democrats confused with the Jeffersonian Democrats. Some people do get those confused. Jefferson's people are more commonly called like Democratic Republicans or just Republicans, and also don't get that confused obviously with the Lincoln Party, the party of Lincoln, the Republicans. So just some key terminology to not mix up. So John Quincy Adams, after his masterful foreign policy and his work there, he wins the presidency. Andrew Jackson, during the War of 1812, he basically, during the War of 1812, he so Britain surrendered, and that sort of ended the war. He attacks one of the ports in the south, like after the war is over. He didn't know the war was over, and he killed a lot of his men, and he also decimated the population that was there. It's basically the only victory of the actual war. And Jefferson sort of gains his Jackson gains his popularity. So Jackson runs on behalf of the Democrats, and John Quincy Adams runs on behalf of the Democratic Republicans. And John Quincy Adams will win, and Jackson accuses him of having a corrupt bargain. So Henry Clay, who we'll talk about in a little more detail, he is the Speaker of the House at the time, and they ran against each other. And basically, Henry Clay gave his votes to John Quincy Adams, allowing him to win the presidency. In exchange for this, John Quincy Adams gives Henry Clay his vice presidency. So Jefferson obviously thinks this is unfair and he accuses them of a corrupt bargain. So just know the phrase corrupt bargain because it does come up a lot, and it's a phrase that you should
Wait.
know.
So Jefferson, he gave what to repeat?
So John Quincy Adams gives Henry Clay, he gives his votes for the presidency to John Quincy Adams, which allows him to kind of reach over that threshold for the presidency. And he's running against Andrew Jackson. I think I might have said Jefferson a couple times. I meant to say Jackson. A lot of the J's are kind of confusing.
Mhm.
Does that clear that up?
Yeah.
Okay. So Jackson's sort of government thing is states' rights. So he's a very democratic person. So just another thing of kind of confusion. So what will happen eventually is called a party switch. So the political parties now, like Democrats being liberals and Republicans being conservatives, it's the opposite before 1960. So Democrats are more conservatives, more the slaveholders, and when we're talking about Republicans, we're talking about the North, and we're talking about more of Abraham Lincoln's presidency. So those are the more liberal sort of reformists versus the democratic sort of slaveholders and reactionary conservatives. So the presidency of Jackson, it is in 1824, I believe. He's a big states' rights guy, champion of states' rights. It's his whole party platform, basically. He's a Democratic Party. He's the Southern Democrats, the old Democrats, or the Dixiecrats, as it's sometimes called. Jackson also introduces the spoils system. So this system is whoever supported his presidency, who supported him being elected, they get sort of rewards. So they get seats in his cabinet. They get judicial seats. They get congressional support. So this is obviously kind of a corrupt thing, and it's something that we'll see be continued all the way until I think 1920 or so. Jackson also campaigned for universal white manhood suffrage. So he campaigns for the right to all white men to have a vote and to have a sort of thing. Before this, white men could only vote if they maintained property, which we sort of went over with the indentured servitude and that kind of thing with Britain especially. But Jackson allows all white men to vote. So this is, yeah, Moscow.
I'm sorry. The spoil system is when he was pretty much bribing people pretty much to vote for him.
It's basically indirect bribery. So people will be rewarded if they supported the president. Like if I was running against you for president, and let's say Jimmy supported me, and he said I'm the best guy, and I win. I'm gonna now elect Jimmy to be my Secretary of State because he supported me and he allowed me to win. If you know, you kind of get that.
Correct.
Okay. So another key point, the white manhood suffrage also is a state's issue. The states decide who can vote or not. So it's basically kind of like an empty promise sort of thing from Jackson. Majority of states do actually start to allow all white men, regardless of property or not, to vote. But it's sort of an empty thing that Jackson kind of spearheads, but not directly does. Jackson is also pretty well known for his infamous Indian Removal Act. So a lot of the Native Americans, especially living in the Florida region and sort of the Seminole, Cherokee Indian region of the South, especially in Georgia, Jackson kicks them out. He says, I have this cool new Indian territory in Oklahoma. where I want you to go. That's where you'll live. So obviously there was no trains, or there was no really roads for these people to use, because cars and trains and such did not exist yet. So these people have to walk. They have to walk from about Georgia and Tennessee and Kentucky all the way to Oklahoma. So just for perspective on that, we're going from all the way on the right side here, basically all the way to above Texas, which is Oklahoma. I think it's something to the effect of 30,000 people or Native Americans do die, whether it be from disease, starvation. It's a very, very brutal practice committed by Jackson, especially. It is probably one of the low points of his actual presidency. So nullification, as I mentioned before, the nullification crisis actually occurs where Andrew Jackson poses the tariff of 1832 in order to sort of spur American manufacturing and spur the American economy. It is unsuccessful, and some states, especially the southern states, North Carolina and South Carolina especially, say, like, I don't want to do this tariff. I don't really think it's constitutional for you to impose this tariff, so I'm going to nullify it. I'm going to say in my state that you don't have to follow that law because it's unconstitutional. Obviously, because Jackson is a big states' rights guy and he supports nullification, but he's also the president, so he has to maintain his power. We get some strife there. He sort of betrays his party's values, and he establishes what's called the Force Bill. So the Force Bill, although it's really never used, is basically saying that the federal government has a right to enforce the law in the states militarily. So Jackson kind of said, like, if you don't follow this law, like, I'm going to bring the troops into your state and we're going to sort this out ourselves.
Wait, are you talking about like a specific law or just like in general?
So the specific one in which occurs in the nullification crisis is the tariff of 1832. So this tariff is really just lowering the rates of the first tariffs. So there were a lot of protection tariffs placed on the southern states to increase their manufacturing, increase their farming, and Jackson tries to lower these rates. The states especially don't like that, so they nullify the tariff, and that's where we get that sort of conflict.
Yeah.
Good. Another key thing of Jackson is the pet banks. So Jackson sort of tears down the national bank, and he establishes these sort of like state and private banks. These basically like local banks in your town would be like pet banks. They wouldn't have direct government support and interest, but they would be sort of semi-autonomous with the government. So it would be both privately and publicly owned, if you can think of it like that. This was extremely unsuccessful. It caused a lot of economic downturn, and it was completely ineffective. And the sort of pet bank laws that Jackson establishes will sort of haunt the United States all the way up to the Civil War. Another key thing of his presidency is Nat Turner's rebellion. So Nat Turner is a well-read black man. He is a preacher, and he sort of one night in his dreams, he sees the world where black men are free. They're no longer slaves, and they are living in harmony with the rest of the world. So what he does is he grabs a couple of his buddies, he grabs a couple guns and such, and he proceeded to kill about 60 white men. These men and the state responded by killing 200 enslaved people, most of which had no connection to the actual rebellion. Nat Turner is executed, obviously, because what he finds is treasonous. That's what they said he did. And Nat Turner's rebellion is unsuccessful. It is actually really unsuccessful because what follows Nat Turner's rebellion is the slave codes. So the slave codes prevent black people from learning how to read. It prevents black people from congregating, and then it further prevents them from voting in any single sense. So black people can now not read by law, and they cannot congregate except for church. So a lot of the religious elements of the church start to take place in the South, especially with Black people, because that's the only place in which they can meet. So these sort of Baptist and Southern religious movements start to really take a hold with the slaves because that's the only place they can sort of meet up. Okay. So our last two presidents of the time period, or I think it's just, no, the last three actually, sorry. So we get the election of Martin Van Buren. He is a relatively insignificant president, doesn't really do too much. Just know that he was a member of the Whig Party. So the Whig Party is sort of this new party, and their basic, in order to be a Whig, you just had to oppose the Democrats. You had to oppose Jackson. So there was a lot of sort of support for the Whigs at this time. The Whigs also believed in government activism, so being advocates for social change, poverty, and such things like that were key and fundamental points of the actual Whig Party. Another Whig Party member, William Henry Harrison, as I mentioned before, he is the first president to die in office after giving a very, very long inauguration speech that results in him getting pneumonia and dying. His vice president, John Tyler, takes the helm and he becomes president. John Tyler is a once Democrat of the South, and he sort of changes a lot of policy of the Whigs. So he doesn't accept the Whigs' policy. He vetoes a lot of their bills, and he makes the Whig Party sort of ineffective and sort of like halted. He's the president called a president without a party because he didn't really have any supporters. No one really liked him. He was just sort of an interim president. He is not reelected for a second term. So that is the whole political aspect of the unit. And then the last part is economics, and we're done. So the economic history of the unit, we have the formation of a market economy. So market economies are basically the buying of selling goods on the market. So we're shifting away from mercantilism, and we're going towards capitalism. So if any of you are familiar with like an Adam Smith type or something like that, where we're sort of talking about capital, labor, and those kind of things, that is the shift we start to see. So the invention
We're
of
shifting we're shifting from what to capitalism?
mercantilism.
We're shifting away
So,
from mercantilism to
yeah.
capitalism.
This is the shift from mercantilism to capitalism.
Okay.
So Eli Whitney, a Southern inventor, invents the cotton gin. I think the statistic for it is the cotton gin is 3,000 times more effective than a human at picking cotton, or something to that, or processing cotton, something to that effect. That's a photo of the cotton gin right there. It's a really good innovation, and actually propped a lot for the manufacturing of cotton in the country, and did lead to more slaves because they had to actually pick the cotton and sort of put it in the cotton gin. So this is the mark of the inventions of the period. Through the 1800s and 1900s, early 1900s, we see a lot of inventions. So like Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla will show up later on. These are sort of, it's called the age of innovation. So Eli Whitney is credited as really one of the first innovators of his time. So the North is increasingly becoming industrialized. So there's a lot of factories in the North, a lot of a lot of children and a lot of men working in these factories. It is brutal, brutal work in these factories. People lived in practical poverty, and they worked in these factories for a bare wage. So in response to this, it's the formation of the labor unions. The labor unions are not strong yet. We don't get the AFL or the Federation of any Labor Party until way later. But labor unions do start to kind of form, and they're relatively unsuccessful in the time period. So the Erie Canal also, let me go back to my map. So the Erie Canal is sort of, I mean, you guys know where Michigan is, obviously. So it establishes a river sort of canal through New York to the actual Erie Lake and the Erie sort of thing over there. And this is our example of like the national road and like trading. So they produced a lot of textiles and a lot of things from their industry, and they treated it with Canada and also parts of the country. Railroads also start getting built in the country. Railroads will become very important later on, but the
It was
early
kind of a trade
railroads are
route.
not being effective.
It was kind of like a trade route.
Yeah, so Erie Canal and railroads you just know for trade. So it
Okay.
made so if you built something in the industry, you could only trade with the people who would buy it, obviously. You know,
Yeah.
so you could only really buy it and sell it at your local flea market because you had no way to transport it somewhere else. You know,
Mhm.
so the Erie Canal and the railroads allow people to start sending their goods further down the line too, to farther states and those kind of things, and actually sell them for a much more profit. The Erie Canal is also completely sponsored by state funds. There is not an ounce of a federal dollar in the building of the Erie Canal. It is completely and utterly funded by the taxpayers of New York. That's a little trivia fun fact if you'd like that. So the
Wait, sorry. What was so significant about the cotton gin again?
about the what?
The cotton gin, like, was that for slaves or was it?
So the
Did they?
cotton gin is the processing of cotton. So basically, it is our first sort of innovation to make cotton more profitable and a more successful sort of crop to be grown. So we also shift from tobacco to cotton. So cotton is a lot more profitable than tobacco. So manifest destiny, or economic trends. So really just know the trends and you'll be good for the test. So the North was industrialized, the South mainly focused on farming and slavery, and the West focused on commercial farming and fur. So the West, commercial farming means that they farmed for profit. So they farmed one crop and then sold that crop on the market. While the South farming is more subsistence farming. So they're farming to eat their next meal, basically. It's not too much of a concern with buying and selling goods for farming. It's more just cotton and slavery that will come out of the South. So
Weren't there other cash crops though in the
yeah,
South besides?
there are other cash crops like rice and tobacco that do exist, but the main one for this course and our intents is cotton. Cotton will be the main crop that is really bought and sold on the world stage. Like goods in Britain were made by American slave-picked cotton. Even though Britain and France had banned slavery, they were still profiting from the slave trade. So if you get a question on the test asking about like the North or something like that, just know it's industrialized and you can really apply that for sort of any region. So Manifest Destiny, as many of you know, this is probably one of the most infamous paintings of the Americas and actually Manifest Destiny. It symbolizes the pioneers and America herself, planting railroads, planting lines, bringing new technologies, pioneers, farming, agriculture to the west of unsettled territory of the Americas. So, part that's not mentioned in this actual, well, it kind of is. If you look at on the left side of the painting, you can see the buffaloes running away. The buffaloes being herded by the cattle rancher on the horse over there, symbolizing the Native Americans being pushed out of the territory. So Manifest Destiny will take place with California, the Republic of Texas, and the Oregon Territory. So for
Indians being pushed out.
like pushed off the land,
Who?
the Native Americans.
Okay.
So the Republic of Texas is a kind of separate thing for a little until it's annexed. Texas is kind of a funky history. Like Texas has its own pledge and constitution. I don't know if you guys know this. Like you know how we say the pledge in before we start the day? They say their own pledge. Like I think it's something like Texas under God or something like that. Something like that. But basically what I'm trying to say is that Texas was its own body for a while, and then it got annexed by the U.S. So as Mexico sort of becomes its own thing and separates from Spain, the mainly white settlers of Texas, because the Mexicans offered them land for money, relatively cheap. They consider themselves Americans. They really didn't consider themselves to be Mexicans, even though they moved to Mexico at the time. So when they want their own form of government, they secede from Mexico, and then they go crying to their American brothers for help. If you guys know, like, remember the Alamo? Like, the Alamo is obviously Davy Crockett, pretty significant event. You don't really have to know about it, just if you happen to know. It's good trivia. Oregon Territory. So Canada and British Columbia are sort of here, and Washington and Oregon are here. America buys Washington and Oregon from the British, and they allow them to keep existing in British Columbia and that sort of Alberta region of Canada, while the Americans take Washington and Oregon. California, 1849. Maso, why is the 49ers called the 49ers?
Because of what happened in 1849.
Which was?
I don't know.
It's right there.
Gold rush.
Not to
Gold
spoil
rush.
it, there's a gold rush. So while there's really no gold in California, a lot of people flocked to there for the new sort of investment in land, agriculture, and what is said to be there in gold. A lot of people really find gold, but it's sort of their excuse to go there. Mice of Men, we all read it last year, I think. I don't know if the CP classes did. Mice of Men sort of is the California, like, early sort of settlement. I think it's 1910 or something to that effect. So that's still really the early stages of Californian history. So California really isn't founded until 1849, 1850, and it's only 50 years old at the time of, like, the turn of the century, of the 1900s. So social issues that will come into effect is the cult of domesticity. So basically, it's a lot of fancy words for just saying women belong in the kitchen. They belong not in the workplace. They belong teaching our children, and they belong as sort of my property, the husband's property. So wives are basically seen as property of their husbands. They belong in the kitchen, tending to the home and tending to the children, rather than stepping out of the home and serving the public and the enterprise. This obviously is turned around in times of war and in times of need. Like, the founder of the Red Cross is a woman. A lot of women did primarily work as nurses, but that doesn't really start to show up until the 60s and the 50s. So the second Great Awakening also happens. So religious movements start to happen again into the South. It is sort of the Baptist, and we see more of a split in the religions. So we kind of go from this nation of Puritans and Protestants to this nation of Catholics, Protestants, Baptists, Puritans, Quakers, Shakers, as they're called. The Shakers are sort of this very progressive Quaker movement. Only thing you need to know about them, just know they're Quakers, and Quakers are pacifists. So if you stuck around for the DBQ yesterday, we read an article from a Quaker, and one of the big takeaway of their viewpoint is that they're a pacifist, so they don't want the war. So our last thing is the abolition movement. So we see an increasing movement of anti-slavery from the North. The abolition movement really won't take effect until the publishing of Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin. So the abolitionists of the time being the Underground Railroad, I'm sure you're all familiar, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, who writes his book, a biography of his life, in which he escapes from slavery, learns how to read and write, and he actually becomes the U.S. ambassador to Cuba. So that's a fun thing. So that is the unit, I believe. If there's any questions,
Oh my god.
if there's any questions, you can ask them. I can also give you some review questions if you'd like.
That
Yeah.
was impressive.
Yeah.
I just did a lot of talking.
We're so screwed.
Just know about the Shakers and the Mormons. Mormons start to exist now. Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith just makes an excuse to have a lot of wives. That's basically what happens.
We're so screwed.
Wait, that was one. That was one unit.
Yeah, that was Unit 4.
Let's
So
go.
units 1 and 3, units 1 through 3 were really easy and they were really short. The rest of the units aren't really like that until you get to units 7, 8, and 9. But these are sort of the denser units. Like 5 is, in my opinion, probably the densest unit because it does both the Civil War and Reconstruction. So if you'd like, I can give you some review questions. If you'd like that.
Yeah, I'll take some review questions.
Wait, I have a question. I'm sorry. You
Yeah.
said that the abolition movement started after the book Tom's Cabin.
It really doesn't become like a significant, like it exists. It doesn't really gain the public support until after the publishing of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which does not happen yet. I believe it's 1853. Harriet Beecher Stowe publishes that book, but the abolition movement of this time is sort of just the sort of black colonization. There's some movements of people wanting to move back to Africa. But the abolition movement right now is really just Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and the Underground Railroad, which was mainly supported by Quakers and sort of the progressives of the time. But it's not popular until Harriet Beecher Stowe and the later parts of the 1850s. Good?
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So here is a review question. I'm going to read the question and read the answers. So if you could bear with me. The controversy over the tariffs during the late 1820s and early 1830s demonstrated that A. New Englanders were more radical than Southerners, as they had been in those days of the American Revolution. B. Andrew Jackson favored states' rights over federal supremacy. C. The system of checks and balances was flawed. Or D. Economic sectionalism, or another name for divide, was a serious threat to national unity.
What was the question?
The controversy over the tariff during the late 1820s and early 1830s demonstrated that.
B?
B?
Maybe.
What did you say?
I said B.
Well,
Did you
I
say
heard
B or
Jackson.
D?
What?
Did you say B or D?
B.
So it is not B. If you remember, Andrew Jackson favored states' rights, but not in the case of the tariff. So if you remember the force bill and sort of the nullification crisis, he says, like, hey, like, I like you guys, but federal government kind of has to win on this one because I'm in charge. So if I'm going to read these again, excluding B, A, New Englanders were more radical than Southerners, as they had been since the days of the American Revolution. C, the system of checks and balances was flawed. Or D, economic divide was a serious threat to national unity.
D.
D.
B.
It is D. So really, for you guys, the
Whoa.
easiest way, the easiest way.
Oh,
to sort of-
Moscow, bro. Put your dogs away.
Not my dogs, bro.
So the easiest way to sort of game these questions is to cross off the ones that you know are false. So like C, you know it's false because the system of checks and balances was flawed because it really doesn't have anything to do with the systems of checks and balances. And the one for A, the tariff was not on the New Englanders, it was on the South. So, we found another one. I mean, there's really not any other really good questions. I'll try here. This one's fun. The Louisiana Purchase was an important factor in the development of U.S. trade because did it A, open new markets among the Western Indian nations? B, did it give money give the country money, or sorry, give the country complete control of the Mississippi River? C, did it add numerous French factories in the Louisiana Territory to the U.S. economy? Or did it D, facilitate the immediate completion of the Transcontinental Railroad?
Can you say B again?
The Louisiana Purchase was an important factor in the development of U.S. trade because it gave the country complete control of the Mississippi River. That is B.
Yeah, I think it's B.
B. Moscow, what do you think?
I would go with B or C.
B.
Thinking B.
So it is B. So if we want to play our game of elimination again, open new markets among the Western Indian nations. The Americans did not want to trade with the Native Americans, so we can get rid of that one immediately. B looks fine, so let's skip it. Did it add numerous French factories in the Louisiana Territory to the U.S. economy? Like, this is a semi-plausible answer, but we also have to remember the French really didn't develop those lands. They really
Yeah.
did not care about those lands. That's why Napoleon sold it off so quickly. And then our last answer, D, did it facilitate the immediate completion of the Transcontinental Railroad? The Transcontinental Railroad will not exist until the 1840s, 1850s. So it did not exist yet.
Got it.
So that was a easy way to do that. So this is a good one actually for us to do. Although the Supreme Court was the weakest of the three branches of the government in the early days of the new republic, John Marshall strengthened the court by, is it A, establishing the principle of federalism, giving federal courts the power to declare laws unconstitutional? Was it B, declaring the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which asserted the right of states to nullify federal laws, unconstitutional? Was it C, establishing the principle of judicial review in the case of McCulloch versus Maryland? Or was it D, establishing the principle of judicial review in the case of Marbury versus Madison? So if I'm look-
It's D. It's D. It's D. It's D.
Oh wait, no wait, D.
D, yeah. So I mean, if you're looking at that off the top of your head, and I see two answers that are basically the same. So what I might do is just cross off the other two that are like their own sort of thing and narrow it down between, is it Marbury versus Madison or is it McCulloch versus Maryland? So those are just the sort of cases you should kind of know off your head. This will be our last question. This is a pretty good one too. Andrew Jackson accused Henry Clay of using his influence to broker a corrupt bargain of 1824, which cost Jackson the election, because Clay was he A, promised a cabinet position if John Quincy Adams was elected president? Was he B, promised the vice presidency if Jackson was defeated? Was he C, knew Jackson did not support his American system? Or was it D, that he feared Jackson's pro-slavery stance on states' rights? A. A is the correct answer as well.
Yeah.
Good job.
Can you say that again?
Which part, John Kim?
A.
So I'll read the question. Andrew Jackson accused Henry Clay of using his influence to broker a corrupt bargain of 1824, which cost Andrew Jackson the election because Clay was promised a cabinet position if John Quincy Adams was elected president. That is the correct answer. Yeah, and basically there's a chapter. Oh, there's actually one more. This is a different type of question, and I think it's probably good that we do this one. So, which of the following statements was not consistent with the foreign policy of the Monroe Doctrine? So, quick, what is the Monroe Doctrine?
Oh, that was the end of Good Feelings, right?
No.
No, it's it's like the doctrine that said that for if you mind your own business in Europe, then we won't interfere with our own like affairs like that, right? Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah, he's
keep that in mind as I'm reading these answers to you. Sort of think in your head, is this something that would fall under it or not? So A, which is not consistent. The U.S. had authority to intervene in the affairs of other nations in the Western Hemisphere. Is it B? The U.S. would not interfere in the affairs of European powers. Was it C? European nations were not permitted to trade with the nations of the Western Hemisphere without U.S. consent? Or was it D? European nations should stay out of the affairs of the Western Hemisphere.
The question was, which is not like the same as the Monroe?
Which is not consistent with the foreign policy of the Monroe Doctrine.
I would say A.
That the U.S. had authority to intervene in the affairs of other nations in the Western Hemisphere?
Of the Western Hemisphere. Then
Yeah,
no,
so
that's,
that is North and South America.
so then not A.
So right, we're crossing out A. Is it
I would
B?
cross out B as well. I would cross out B.
So we're between C and D then.
Can you repeat the two?
Yeah. Is it more likely that it was not European nations were not permitted to trade with the nations of the Western Hemisphere without the consent of the United States? Or was it that European nations should stay out of affairs of the Western Hemisphere?
I would say probably D.
D as in the one that's not consistent?
Yes.
So it is going to be C. So basically, D is kind of very similar to question A or answer A, right? So D says European nations should stay out of the affairs of the Western Hemisphere. So that is something that is consistent with the doctrine. While European nations not being permitted to trade with the hemisphere is something that is not consistent with the actual Monroe.
Okay.
It did not bar trade. It just said keep your military out of the Western Hemisphere. So that is sort of our little thing. I can read this last summary. That's only a couple sentences if you'd like. The important concepts to remember from the American democracy period, or the period we just did, was the new United States struggled to define its ideals as boundaries changed and regional opinions clashed. New developments in technology, agriculture, and commerce built wealth and infrastructure, transforming America from a wilderness to a developed society. Relationships with Britain and France were problematic, each country playing off one another. After the War of 1812, relationships stabilized. Slavery became one of the most controversial issues in politics and the social sphere. Abolitionists, feminists, and temperance activists organized, published, and lectured to promote their ideas. So those are the main takeaways from the chapter.
Got it.
Any questions?
No.
Okay, then that is our
I
lesson
have a
for
question.
tonight. Yeah, Moscow?
Can you share the PowerPoints?
Yes, I believe I did. I will also right now I will make the PowerPoints a link. So let me escape.
Thanks, Mo. Thanks, Nappy.
Thank
So
you. No.
so I'm going to make this unlisted. So let's do that for a second. Sharpsburg High School. So it is anyone with the link, and you will be a viewer. So I copied that link. I will put it now in the Zoom chat. If you'd like to use the PowerPoint, you may. I will be updating it as I sort of do these presentations and do these videos. I'm also, yeah, my schedule was kind of rocky. I kind of mentioned that. So I'm thinking that I might have another lecture for this on Unit 5 on Friday. It's dependent on if I have a baseball game or not. But if I don't, I might do another one of these night sessions. I'm thinking Thursday or tomorrow night, maybe Friday night or something like that. And I'm probably also going to have one on Sunday, some period in the day, because not at night, because that's not beneficial. But the exam is next Friday. So you have about 10 days before the test. So while these sessions are sort of good to learn it, like I'm not covering every single little thing. I'm giving you the main ideas and the main takeaways. So while this may help you to get like a 3 or even a 4 or something like that, if you are searching or striving for that 5 or 4, this may not be the best help for you, but it will definitely, if you listen, it will make you pass, I think, in my opinion. But I will keep you guys in the loop. If I am unable to do it, I'm just going to keep making these videos, posting it to my YouTube. Let me see if my thing is up here. So my YouTube, I don't know if I shared it with you guys. It is nicknap1129. So it is my sort of birthday and my, oh, this is the wrong account, sorry. It is my actual name, so nicknap and then 1129, which is my date of birth. The other video which I shared with you guys is on there. So this video is also going to be posted. So this is the actual account. Don't make fun of me. I made it in like 7th grade, 8th grade or so.
My cousin.
Justin is in this fight. Yes, he breaks someone's lip, and it's very funny actually. That's a very good video. Not gonna promo that, but it's I like that video as well. I edited that too. Pretty good. It's pretty funny. So this is obviously the one we did yesterday, and this one is also going to be posted on there tonight. So if you have any friends or something who say like, "Oh, I didn't know this meeting was happening," or something along that effect, have them shoot me a text, shoot me a snap or something, or point them in the direction of this YouTube channel. I emailed Bell to maybe get these videos or at least my account sort of like put out there to anyone who wants to study, but I'm not completely sure if he is receiving my communications. So if he's in school, I will try to talk to him, but if not, this is the channel, and I'll keep updating it as I keep doing it. For you guys who kind of left early yesterday, I mean, you didn't leave early. I'm not like bitter or anything. What's really important is that you look at the DBQ section. So you don't have to completely look at like this sort of thing, but I would recommend looking at this. So we do go over the actual rubric that is pretty unfamiliar to you guys. The rubric is very easy. If you follow the rubric, you will pass. So I kind of go over how to get the points, how to sort of game the system to get you the full amount of points. So besides that, guys, that is sort of my recording tonight. So I will
Appreciate
see you.
that.
If anyone has any questions, stick around. But thank you guys for actually caring about your grades. And I hope you all pass the test. And I really, like Uncle Sam says here, I want you to pass the exam.
We're gonna pass this shit.
Yes, sir. Let's go.
Oh.